I think the isolation of the patients is the worst thing that happened. They were literally, it was a bargain. You can see your family member if you're willing to let us euthanize you. I mean, it was literally that. You're sick. These people were like, I'm not taking intubation. And then the doctors would say, well, you're going to die like without it. And then they're like, okay. But I want to see my family. And they're like, well, if you sign this DNR, this order, and they would literally euthanize them. They would keep putting morphine into these people until they'd stop breathing. They'd open up a bed and a new patient would come in. The only way you could see family is if you said, okay, I'll let you kill me. And at first you couldn't even have family. There wasn't even that bargaining tool. And that's how it was. And then it came a point where, okay, if you're end stage, you're gonna die and you're willing to submit to that, well, you can have one family member come in. And a lot of people would say, okay, I just want to see my wife, and then you can kill me. And they would literally euthanize them like a dog. I watched it happen. They'd give them morphine until they stopped breathing. They'd be dead in an hour. Now, some of these people that did that might have lived if they'd have just hung on a few more days. But they just so badly wanted to see a family member. They'd been in there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they're struggling. It's not easy. They're sick, but some of them might have lived. But once you sign the comfort cares, well, the hospital can have you dead within an hour with enough morphine. They start decreasing the amount of oxygen they're giving you, any ventilator support, any non-invasive ventilation or whatever they're providing you. They just start pulling that back slowly. They start increasing the sedation, the Ativan, give the morphine, and then the patient starts to struggle because they're out of their mind. They're so morphined out, and it's just at that point you just keep giving more and more morphine until you literally just make their breathing stop. And I've heard this from many other hospitals too, anecdotally. The only way you get a family member in is if you go comfort cares. So, and all these things they're doing, it made no sense to me. But I will say, I was watching the news, CNN, and they showed, and being a respiratory therapist, you understand this. They showed a video. They said in New York City, they'd run out of ventilators and they had to use one ventilator on 2 patients. They showed a picture. I have these pictures still saved on my computer. It was a lie. Understanding what it takes to use one ventilator on 2 patients is extraordinarily complicated. So I saw that the media was lying, and I started questioning everything. My relationship with the doctors at the hospital I worked at was impeccable for a decade. Impeccable. I was a very valuable part of their team. They trusted me to assess these patients. I ran the ventilators. But once I questioned anything, they would no longer talk to me. And let's talk about early intubation. The first thing that you started hearing is Cuomo ordered 30,000 ventilators. Early intubation. And now looking back at the end of my tenure at the hospital I was at, the doctors did admit that early intubation was ridiculous, but they wouldn't listen to me at the front end. I'm trying very hard. I kept some people from getting intubated. But to let people know what it means to be intubated, it is barbaric. It is something you don't ever want to do electively. Most of us in our lifetimes will probably get intubated at some point for maybe a hip surgery or a knee replacement or something like that, where you're intubated, where intubation means they're putting a tube down your trachea and they're going to breathe for you. You're sedated for this. And it is, it's a big tube. These things are, we call it a garden hose. It's not quite that big, but it's invasive. And the complications that arise from intubation are profound. I learned the first year of my career in 1999, I went to a doctor's symposium, and I worked at a big teaching hospital. They had a lot of data they could pull from, and they had discovered that when you intubate somebody for whatever reason, their risk of mortality goes up 25%. Therefore, the message was avoid it at all costs. You're just, if you don't have to do it, you only do it in an emergency. And so during this COVID pandemic, under the guise of protecting the practitioners, the clinicians, the doctors from this aerosolization, because it's a closed circuit, they would intubate everybody. Early intubation. And sometimes they were intubating these patients when they were on such a negligible amount of oxygen as to not really even need the oxygen. It blew my mind that they were doing this. It is just very dangerous to do, and to do it early was ridiculous. And I think now everyone, the consensus is yes, that was a ridiculous thing to do. And so being intubated for a little while, probably not going to harm you. You're going to have a sore throat. Being intubated for days, weeks, sometimes months at a time, it's a disaster.
When I got to New York, very different situation. The hydroxychloroquine was banned for off-label use. If doctors did try to prescribe it, they would likely lose their license and lose their job. And their first line of defense was the ventilators there. And I can tell you that the minute that an ICU bed was available, there was already a patient in there on the vent, on the same vent that the deceased patient just got off of. So it was essentially an assembly line to a body bag. So
wow.
It just worked. It worked that way. So I can't tell you, honestly, from my perspective, how people were admitted. But I do know that many people were admitted to these floors that didn't need to be admitted at all.
They basically, as soon as the vent opened up, they had another person on it right away.
Yeah. Event never rested. So this was a younger man that presented to the emergency room with, difficulty breathing, other symptoms. Now, I don't know. I mean, I obviously wasn't in the emergency room, but that's what his chart stated. And essentially, he was admitted, and he was put on a BiPAP, which is a less invasive. It's a breathing machine. It's pretty commonly used. It's safe, effective. A lot of people use them, even at home. They'll have them overnight if they have sleep apnea or something. And you have to think, if you think as a patient, you're terrified. You're going into this hospital that has been all over national news with freezer trucks of bodies in the back, and you're going in there with symptoms of difficulty breathing, etc. It's terrifying. And so and they're being admitted without family members with them, so they are completely alone in this. And they get admitted to these rooms. Everybody is dressed in head to toe PPE. So you can't really tell who anybody is. They're walking around. Everybody looks scary. It's not a good look. Everybody's, you can see people's eyes. That's it. You can't hear them. And you're this patient that they're taking care of. So you're coming in the room and you're losing that connection, because you look terrifying. These patients are terrified. So these machines are very uncomfortable on people's faces, so it causes even more anxiety, because now they can't even really talk because they have a breathing machine on their face. So their anxiety is going up. They're getting really uncomfortable. I'll just say in my hospital, if in that type of a scenario, we would have gotten a staff member to sit with this patient in their room and just comfort them and be by their side and hold their hand and walk them through this and take the time to just work with them and take care of them. That is what would have saved his life right there. That is the moment that would have saved his life. If they would have taken the time, and I wasn't with him during this time. A friend of mine that I worked with on this unit was. And what happened with him is that he just I just can't keep it on. I just can't, he was just getting really restless, and he was worried and scared. And the residents ruled the roost there. Residents have finished medical school, but they don't have any hands-on clinical experience, so they can't work alone. So the thing that they, did is, okay, well, if you can't handle that, either you're going to probably die if you don't get on a ventilator. And that's how they coerce these patients into signing their own consents. So he didn't want to sign it. This is this is what my friend told me. And I mean, from looking into his, in the background, it made sense to me that he didn't want to do it. He was terrified, but he's like, you know what? If this is going to save my life, I guess this is what I have to do. Not knowing any better, not having any family, not having anybody to advocate for them, because the nurses didn't have much say. If you start questioning that, you're moved or kicked out. It can't put a blanket statement that every single resident and every single attending and every single fellow or nurse was bad. Mm-hmm. But essentially, they were outnumbered. So let's say you have a really good resident and a really good attending doctor on mm-hmm. day shift, and then those guys go home, and a new round of residents and attendings take over and just ruin it. So you get back in the morning, and now your patient is probably not going to make it because it was just poor care given. So, that caused a lot of problems. And then there was really no consistency. So the residents and the attendings went around in groups. And the group would stay for a week and be taking care of these patients. And then they'd go to a new unit, and we get a brand new set of residents and attendings taking care of. There was just no consistency in care. Wow. And that's huge. The continuity of care for patients, to have I would stay with most of my patients every single day. Like, I knew them inside mm-hmm. and out. I knew everything about them. I knew where they were from. I mean, when you're taking care of a patient, you get to know them. Even if they're on events, I would be talking to their families on the FaceTime. Mm-hmm. I would be doing the best I could. But these residents didn't have that same experience. They were moved around, switched around so often that there was no way to be able to keep up with the progress these patients were making along the way. In my opinion, the residents were essentially just practicing their skills, because it was the mindset of the majority that, well, they're not going to make it anyway, so it is what it is. And
wow,
that was really hard for me to swallow, because so you're not even going to try? You guys aren't even going to try? Like, you're just going to give up? Like, they have a fighting chance. Like, some of these patients had a fighting chance.
Yeah.
The guy I mentioned earlier with the bypass, that we actually extubated him, put him on a bypass, and then they re-intubated him, and he died. He was 35 years mm-hmm. old. He didn't have to die. And I knew that, and everybody knew that. And actually, I have a recording of a doctor saying that he didn't have to die. He said that a sitter would have been a good idea, and that probably would have saved his life. But, oh well. And that was the mindset, and that's why all these people died, because nobody cared. They were seen as, disposable. A lot of them, the majority of patients admitted, were very low income, from, a lot of poverty. And they're just viewed as disposable human beings. And that in itself just should make anybody just stick to their stomach.
And there were stories, I believe you told some, and there's another nurse that was that came forward who said, sometimes the residents made big mistakes based on their lack of experience, and they would not. Some of them wouldn't listen and just sort of went ahead with things that were injurious to the patients.
Yeah, ego got in the way. Ego got in the way of a lot of patient care, because it's hard for a doctor to admit that they're wrong, and a nurse who obviously has, in their mind, less training them is trying to correct them. So it was a huge power struggle. And it's like that on a good day in the hospital. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I know that most nurses would contest to that. Most of them are terrified to even, speak to a doctor. So it's that type of an environment, the hierarchy, and it's costing patients their lives and their health. And this is outside of the pandemic too. So we really need to, as a society, look at our healthcare and how it's set up and reform it.